The global success of Final Fantasy VII was the main reason behind the establishment of the Square office in Honolulu, not just for the development perspective, but also for the movie as well. The Final Fantasy Spirit Within was one of the first movies to be released by the studio back in 2001. During this period, series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi personally moved to Square's Hawaii office. Seeing how heavily Final Fantasy VII relied on cutscenes, he believed film was the next logical step. He focused entirely on this goal and, within just 2 years, successfully established movie-making development at Square and aimed to debut the world's first digital actress, Aki Rose. For reference, even bigger movie studios like Pixar took nearly 10 years to get up on their feet in this industry, which indicated that Sakaguchi did a tremendous job and played a vital role in the establishment of Square office at Hawaii. The movie Spirit Within was the reason Square was at a loss for the first time in their career, and that was the period when Sakaguchi was stepping down because he thought he was responsible for this failure. After the departure of Sakaguchi, that was when everything started to change massively at Square. The developers at Square were at a loss and suffered a disease called the big company disease, where everything was connected to the cost and the lack of creativity was very much noticeable. Tetsuya Nomura's comment in Famitsu that Aerith and Sephiroth were siblings are some of the signs of early development sketches in 1995 to 1996. The designer Nomura made both characters share the same distinctive bangs, 2 long, thick strands of hair covering the face. He designed them with a similar height and elegance, and even after the sibling idea was scrapped, the developers kept the visual link to maintain a duality. Aerith represents the life of the planet, the lifestream, while Sephiroth represents the death, which is the calamity. Then the sibling relation was converted to him being Aerith's first love. This version of the script would have fundamentally changed the emotional weight of the game, because if Sephiroth had been Aerith's first love, her death at the Forgotten Capital wouldn't have just been a tragedy, it would have been a betrayal of the heart. Yoshinori Kitase and Kazushige Nojima, the writer, realized that the story was becoming too focused on Sephiroth. By creating Zack Fair, they were able to flesh out Cloud's identity crisis, which is the soldier persona, and gave Aerith a tragic backstory that felt more grounded and human, rather than tied to the main villain. However, in that Kitase interview, the same question was asked and he said they weren't supposed to be related. There is probably truth in both of these responses and showcases how things can change over time, but also, since Nomura was working with the earliest drafts and the sibling connection might be the core foundation of the story, as for Kitase, since he is the director and probably looked at the final scripts by which the game went into production, the sibling idea had vanished and never made it to the game. Hot-blooded Detective Joe was a scrapped character or protagonist for Final Fantasy VII in earlier drafts. He was on the trail of Avalanche and was originally going to be the protagonist for the first part of the game. In the earliest drafts, Final Fantasy VII leaned toward a noir-style narrative focused on Midgar, with Avalanche as a suspicious group being pursued, which suited a loud, justice-driven detective protagonist. However, as development progressed, the team shifted toward a more emotional, psychological, and mythical storytelling centered on identity, memory, and trauma that needed a calmer main character who struggles inside and doubts himself. Cloud Strife's uncertain sense of self and unreliable memories allowed players to experience confusion and emotional depth alongside him, something a confident, hot-blooded character like Joe could not support. Additionally, Cloud's restrained personality translated better to a global audience and fit the game's increasingly tragic tone. Rather than being removed entirely, Detective Joe was redesigned into a minor NPC, included as a fun reference to Final Fantasy VII's original ideas, while the role of protagonist was given to a character better suited to the story FF7 ultimately became. In my opinion, this direction was much better suited for the current theme of the game, but the Detective Joe route would be interesting for the audience as well, and also serves as a chance to go into another direction in the form of noir-style focused detective approach, which would be very interesting for the new audience coming towards the Final Fantasy games. If you're still watching, I hope you're loving the video. And if you're not asleep yet, of course, consider subscribing to the channel as we may have your favorite game in the video production pipeline right now, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Anyways, shall we continue? One of the earliest Easter eggs in Final Fantasy VII appears almost immediately at the start of the game. After you jump off the train and enter Mako Reactor 1, if you take a moment to look around the lobby area instead of rushing ahead, you can spot an advertisement for something called Bonora White Apple Juice. Most players see it, think it's just a random background detail, and move on. But it actually connects to a much bigger story in the Final Fantasy VII universe. That small ad is a direct reference to Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, the PSP prequel. In Crisis Core, Bonora Village plays a major role in the plot. It is the hometown of Genesis Rhapsodos, one of the game's main antagonists. Genesis is a dramatic and poetic character, clearly designed to echo Sephiroth in both appearance and attitude. He is also famously modeled after the Japanese musician Gackt, which made him instantly recognizable to many fans. One strange but important detail about Genesis is that he is often seen carrying or referencing a white apple. This isn't just for style. It ties directly back to Bonora. The village is known for its rare white apples, which became a symbol throughout Crisis Core. These apples represent Bonora itself, something pure, rare, and ultimately destroyed by Shinra's experiments. Here's where the connection gets even more interesting. According to Crisis Core's background lore, Genesis actually invented Bonora White Apple Juice when he was a child. This is a real in-universe detail. He entered a competition with the idea of turning Bonora's white apples into a drink, and he won. The juice later became Bonora's most famous export, spreading the village's name far beyond its borders. So that small ad in Mako Reactor 1 isn't just decoration. It's a callback to Crisis Core, to Genesis, and to Bonora Village, a place that no longer exists by the time FF7 begins. It's also an early game example of how Final Fantasy VII uses background details to connect its world across different games, rewarding players who pay attention and remember the wider story. In short, Bonora White Apple Juice is one of Final Fantasy VII's earliest and cleverest Easter eggs, a simple poster that carries with it an entire history of loss, memory, and tragedy from the larger Final Fantasy VII compilation. Another fun Easter egg in Final Fantasy VII can be found in the form of a hair tonic advertisement that appears in a few places throughout Midgar. At first glance, it looks just like a normal poster for a hair care product, something you'd expect to see in a busy city. But if you stop and actually read the small text, the joke becomes clear. The ad claims that the product provides ideal scalp care and promises astonishingly radiant and spiky hair. That specific wording is where the reference comes in. It's a clear joke about Cloud Strife's iconic hairstyle, which has become one of the most recognizable looks in gaming. Over the years, fans have jokingly placed Cloud into the classic trope of the spiky-haired anime swordsman, and this poster leans right into that idea. You can find this advertisement in the upper plate area of Midgar, blending naturally into the environment. The product's name itself doesn't directly reference Cloud, but the description in the fine print feels too specific to be a coincidence. It almost answers a long-running fan joke. How does Cloud's hair stay like that all the time? According to the poster, the secret is hair tonic. It's a small background detail, but that's what makes it so charming. The game never pointed out or explains the joke, and you're meant to notice it on your own. This kind of humor adds personality to the world and shows that the developers are fully aware of Cloud's famous look and how often it's been joked about over the years. In the end, the hair tonic poster is another example of how Final Fantasy VII uses subtle environmental details to reward observant players. It's a light-hearted, amusing nod to Cloud's legendary hairstyle, hidden in Midgar streets for fans to smile at when they catch it. There's another funny and easy-to-miss Easter egg inside 7th Heaven, Tifa's bar. If you look around the walls, you'll notice a few picture frames hanging up. At first glance, they don't seem important at all, just blurry, pixelated images that look like random images. Most players probably walk right past them without giving them a second look. But if you stop and look more closely, those pictures are actually screenshots of the original 7th Heaven from the PS1 version of Final Fantasy VII. When you compare them side by side, it becomes clear that they are basically the same images. You can recognize the old bar layout, the arcade machines, and the interior design exactly as they appeared in the PlayStation 1 game. It's clear the remake took inspiration from the original, but what's impressive is how accurate they made it. What makes this especially interesting is how faithful the developers rebuilt these locations. Seeing the old PS1 style version framed on the wall inside the modern remake feels like the game quietly showing respect to its own history. The original FF7 was known for its surprisingly detailed environments, even in places you might only visit once. A lot of care went into making every area feel real and memorable. This Easter egg in Seventh Heaven shows that the remake team wanted to carry that legacy of care forward. By including a picture frame with a screenshot of the original Seventh Heaven, the remake connects the past and present in a small but meaningful way, something fans can smile at when they notice it. This is a pretty unique Easter egg, so it's easy to miss. While walking around the Sector 7 slums, you might overhear some random NPCs talking to each other about something strange. They mention a play and say that its ending seems to be different this year. On its own, this sounds like odd background chatter and nothing more. But this is Final Fantasy VII Remake we're talking about, where almost every small detail connects to something else. This line of dialogue is actually a reference to Crisis Core. The play that people were talking about is Loveless. You may recognize the name from the large billboard shown in the opening cutscenes of the original game. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Loveless was mostly just world-building flavor. Crisis Core, however, expanded on it heavily, turning it into an important part of the lore. Loveless is presented as a legendary play whose final act is lost or unclear. Different versions of the story exist, and the ending seems to change depending on who performs it and when. That detail lines up perfectly with what the people mention about the play having a different ending this year. In the Final Fantasy VII universe, this uncertainty is very intentional, adding to the idea that the story is incomplete or misunderstood. Of course, Crisis Core goes even further with this concept. The game spends a lot of time explaining Loveless in detail, sometimes more than it really needed to. The villain, Genesis, constantly quotes lines from the play, treating it like a sacred text. This became one of his most well-known traits and, for many players, also one of the most annoying. So when you hear NPCs casually talking about a play with a changing ending, it's not random dialogue at all. It's another subtle hint to Crisis Core, and a reminder that FF7 Remake quietly includes older lore into everyday conversations, even when most players walk right past it without noticing. Another fun detail in FF7 Remake involves some very familiar faces for older fans: Moogles, Chocobos, Tonberries, and Cactuars. These little creatures show up as scribbles and drawings scattered around Midgar, and if you look carefully, you can actually find all 4 of them drawn together in one place inside the Sector 5 orphanage. It's a small touch that feels like a celebration of the series' history. These 4 creatures are some of the oldest and most iconic characters in the entire Final Fantasy franchise. At this point, they aren't exactly unique Easter eggs. Even people with only basic knowledge of Final Fantasy would probably recognize at least one of them. Still, it's fun to see them included. Chocobos are easily the most famous. They are large, usually flightless birds that characters ride for transportation, and they've appeared in almost every Final Fantasy game since Final Fantasy II. In Final Fantasy VII, they became especially memorable because of the Chocobo farm, where players could capture wild chocobos, breed them, race them, and keep breeding them until they unlocked the legendary Gold Chocobo. That Gold Chocobo allowed access to the ultimate summon in the game, and arguably the entire series, Knights of the Round. Moogles are probably the second most recognizable. They are small, fluffy, cat-like creatures that first appeared in Final Fantasy III. Western audiences likely know them the most from Final Fantasy VI, released in the US as Final Fantasy III, where you can actually have a Moogle named Mog as a party member. Mog later gets referenced in Final Fantasy VII through a gold saucer minigame, and even the Moogle shop owner mentions him when you first meet. Tonberries are famous for being some of the most terrifying enemies in the series, despite their harmless appearance. They look like small, slow-moving lizard creatures. They slowly walk toward the party, barely reacting, and then suddenly unleash an extremely powerful insta-kill attack. They first appeared in Final Fantasy V and have become notorious ever since. Interestingly, they've had some strange name changes over the years. In the original US release of Final Fantasy VI, they were called Pugs, and in the anthology version of Final Fantasy V, they were bizarrely renamed Dingleberries. Yes, that's real. Finally, there are the Cactuars. They first appeared in Final Fantasy VI, where they were originally called Cactrots. They were renamed Cactuars in Final Fantasy VII. These enemies are strange, fast, and dangerous, and they often act like Final Fantasy's version of metal slimes from Dragon Quest. They tend to run away quickly, but if you manage to defeat one, you're rewarded with a huge amount of experience points. The image is a beautiful and symbolic representation of the Promised Land from the original Final Fantasy VII. Major spoilers for the original ending, by the way, just in case you haven't seen it. You can see the life stream flowing through everything, connecting the Cetra, regular humans, animals, and even several summons. It represents life as one connected cycle, with all returning to the planet. At the very center of the drawing is a yellow flower. In the game, yellow flowers are mentioned more than once as a symbol of reunion. These flowers are closely tied to Aerith, so the image clearly connects the idea of reunion with her presence and her role in the story. This symbolism points directly to the ending of Final Fantasy VII and what the Promised Land truly is. Not a physical place, but a spiritual return to the planet and the lifestream. The drawing also appears to show the flower pushing back Meteor, surrounded by the power of the lifestream. This is another unique reference to the final moment of the original game, where the planet responds to the threat and saves itself. The flower standing at the center secures the idea that Aerith's sacrifice and connection to the planet are what make that possible. What makes this so special is how nice it is. The game never explains the drawing straight or calls any attention to it. Instead, it uses visual narrative to tell the story of FF7's ending in a calm, symbolic way. For players who recognize it, the image quietly reflects the game's final message about life, loss, reunion, and the planet itself. It's a powerful example of how Final Fantasy VII Remake uses small details to honor the original story with care and respect. When Final Fantasy VII was released, it came with an original soundtrack that was just as impressive as the game itself. Music featured a wide range of styles, moods, and instruments. When paired with the different locations players explored, the characters they met, and major story moments they experienced, the soundtrack became incredibly memorable. This continued a long tradition in the Final Fantasy series where music always played a major role in shaping the emotional impact of the game. At the center of all this was Nobuo Uematsu. He wasn't just the main composer, he wrote every single track in the game. On top of that, he rearranged the music to fit the needs of the development team and served as the producer of the entire soundtrack. As expectations for the game grew, so did the size of the audio team supporting him. This was partly because Square had started taking game soundtracks more seriously as standalone products. They were no longer just background music for gameplay, but albums meant to be sold on their own, along with special arranged versions that required higher production quality. As a result, Uematsu worked with a growing team that included a sound programmer, sound engineer, recording engineer, mastering engineer, and multiple people dedicated to creating sound effects. For Final Fantasy VII, the goal was to push audio production even further than before. One early idea was to include vocal performances in many tracks, which Uematsu believed would make the music more immersive. However, after testing this, the team found that long loading times made the idea impractical. Because of this, vocals were limited to only the most important moments in the game. That decision led to the creation of the famous Sephiroth choir, most notably used in One Winged Angel, and possibly another track called Those Chosen by the Planet. According to the credits, the choir consisted of 8 singers, evenly split between soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. One of these singers was a relatively unknown musician at the time named Masashi Hamauzu, who would later become a major figure in the Final Fantasy series. He went on to serve as the main composer for much of the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy and later became one of the lead composers for Final Fantasy VII Remake. In Final Fantasy VII, Hamauzu was one of the 2 bass vocalists in the Sephiroth choir. He also worked as a synthesizer operator, helping perform a section adapted from Hayden's The Creation. As his role at Square grew over time, Hamauzu began bringing other members of the Sephiroth choir back to work with him on future projects. One of those members was Matsue Fukushi, one of the 2 soprano vocalists on the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. Not long after the game's release, Hamauzu and Fukushi got married. She later returned to work as a vocalist on Final Fantasy VIII, credited under the name Matsue Hamauzu. and went on to contribute to several other Square and Square Enix projects, including Sigma Harmonix and Final Fantasy XIII, often working alongside her husband. Other choir members also continued contributing to the series. Daisuke Hara, one of the two tenors, worked on Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XI, and even performed in some of the early Distant Worlds Final Fantasy concert tours. The other tenor, Toru Tabe, contributed to Final Fantasy VII Unlimited Saga, Final Fantasy VIII, and World of Final Fantasy, working both as a singer and a guitarist. Altogether, the soundtrack of Final Fantasy VII wasn't just the result of one composer, but a growing collaboration that helped shape the future of Final Fantasy music. What started as a game score ended up influencing live concerts, future soundtracks, and even the careers of the people involved, cementing Final Fantasy VII's music as one of the most important in gaming history. Final Fantasy VII's development went through what can only be described as a platform-hopping disaster. The game originally began development in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, then briefly moved into Nintendo 64 testing, before finally ending up as a PlayStation exclusive. This constant switching makes it one of the most extreme cases of musical chairs in video game history. Square didn't just plan for these systems, they actually built working prototypes for 3 completely different consoles. The turning point came when Square learned that Nintendo's next console, the Nintendo 64, would not use CD-ROMs. Instead, Nintendo chose to continue using cartridges. This was a huge problem for Square. Final Fantasy VII was becoming too large and ambitious, especially with its heavy use of music, story content, and full-motion video. Cartridges simply couldn't store that much data without severe limitations. Once Square realized this, they decided it was time to move on. What makes this situation even more unusual is that every time the platform changed, Square had to rebuild major parts of the game from scratch. The technology, memory limits, and development tools were completely different on each system. As a result, Square spent nearly 2 years working on versions of Final Fantasy VII that were never released. In many ways, this created one of the most expensive lost development efforts in gaming history. Each version would have been very different. The SNES version would have been entirely sprite-based, similar to earlier Final Fantasy games. The Nintendo 64 version would have required heavy compression, cutting back on visuals, audio quality, and cinematic presentation. Only the PlayStation version allowed Square to fully realize its vision, especially with the use of pre-rendered CGI cutscenes, which became some of the most iconic moments in gaming and still impress players today. When Square officially announced that Final Fantasy VII would be a PlayStation exclusive, Nintendo executives were reportedly furious. This decision caused a major break between Nintendo and Square that lasted more than a decade. Square shifted its support almost entirely to Sony, while Nintendo lost one of its most important third-party partners. One of the most famous and unexpected parts of Final Fantasy VII is what fans often call the translation disaster that turned into internet gold. Long before the "all your base are belong to us" became popular, FF7 had already given players unforgettable lines like "this guy are sick." It's a grammatical mess, but one so strangely perfect that it became famous simply because of how wrong it was. The reason these errors happened is actually very obvious. The English localization team were given only 4 months to translate a script that was longer than most novels. On top of that, they were working with incomplete information. They had little to no gameplay footage, little context for scenes, and often had to translate lines without fully knowing who was speaking, both to whomever or in whatever situation. In many ways, they were trying to translate a movie they had never seen using scattered notes written in a language that was difficult to interpret quickly. One of the translators, Karen Fetzer, later explained that because of the intense schedule, it simply wasn't possible to double-check every line. She said that given how fast they were working, it was inevitable that some awkward or incorrect sentences would slip through. These weren't careless mistakes. They were the result of extreme time pressure and limited resources. What's surprising is what happened afterward, actually. Instead of being forgotten or mocked into the unknown, these translation mistakes became deeply loved by the fans. Over time, the strange grammar and oddly worded lines became part of Final Fantasy VII's charm. Fans quoted them, joked about them, and remembered them just as lovingly as the game's most emotional moments. Hidden deep inside Final Fantasy VII's code is a secret developer test room that was never meant for players to see. It isn't unlocked through normal gameplay, but it can be reached using simple memory editing or save file tricks. Once inside, the game suddenly feels wrong. The room is filled with test NPCs that say strange things no normal character ever would. Some of their dialogue sounds unfinished, awkward, or completely unhinged. One NPC even says, "Huh? You're not thinking of stepping on me, are you? It may be a flaw, but that don't give you the right." It's pretty weird, and it kind of feels like the developers are talking to their own code. Although it's unfinished, it's still pretty interesting. Visually, the room looks like a broken version of the game. Graphics don't match, objects float in the air, and characters appear together who should never exist in the same place. It looks like a glitchy mess, as if the game's rules stopped working entirely. Walking through it feels like stepping into the developers' half-finished ideas or strange late-night experiments. What makes it even more interesting is that some of these test NPCs mention story elements and characters that were removed before the final release. These are leftovers from an earlier version of Final Fantasy VII, ideas that were abandoned but never fully erased. In a way, they are digital ghosts, pieces of a game that almost existed but were changed along the way. Players didn't find this room until many years after the game came out, using ROM hacking and save file manipulation to dig through the data. Square has never officially talked about it or acknowledged that the room exists, but that silence makes the discovery feel even stranger. One of the most powerful moments in Final Fantasy VII didn't come from the game at all, but came from real life. During the game's development, director Hironobu Sakaguchi was dealing with the loss of his mother. Her death deeply affected him, and that grief directly shaped what would become one of the most heartbreaking scenes in video game history. Sakaguchi didn't want death in the game to feel dramatic or heroic. He wanted it to feel sudden, unfair, and deeply upsetting, the way real loss often feels. He said that his goal was for players to experience the same shock and helplessness he felt himself. Death doesn't arrive with a warning. It doesn't give you time to prepare, and sometimes you don't even get the chance to say goodbye properly. That idea is exactly what makes Aerith's death so powerful. It comes out of nowhere. There's no final speech, no last heroic moment, and no way to stop it. The player is left stunned, confused, and emotionally empty, just like someone experiencing real loss. Sakaguchi also wanted the game to carry a lasting sense of grief, not just a moment of sadness. Aerith doesn't come back. The world moves on, but something important is gone forever. To make sure the scene landed exactly the way he wanted, Square poured an incredible amount of effort into it. In fact, they spent more development time on that short death sequence, roughly 30 seconds, than many games spend on entire levels. The scene was so technically demanding that it required a dedicated programmer who worked on nothing else for 3 straight months. One person's full-time job was to carefully craft digital heartbreak, making sure every camera angle, animated frame, and timing choice hit with perfect precision. And it worked. Decades later, Aerith's death is still remembered as one of the most emotional and shocking moments in gaming because it felt painfully real. Back in 1997, the way Square managed to fit Final Fantasy VII onto just 3 discs was nothing short of a technical miracle. At the time, the PlayStation was still relatively new, and most games struggled to include even a few minutes of low-resolution video. Yet, this game featured over 60 minutes of high-quality cinematic cutscenes that looked like actual movies. When you consider that all of this video, plus the massive game world and music, had to fit into roughly 1.8 gigabytes of total space, it becomes clear that the programmers were doing something that seemed physically impossible for the technology of that era. The secret to this digital magic was a specialized compression system that the engineers at Square built themselves. While most companies used standard methods to shrink files, Square developed a custom codec, essentially a secret digital language, to squeeze massive amounts of data into tiny spaces. They were able to take high-definition movie files and shrink them down so small that they would fit onto standard CDs without losing the detail that made them so impressive. It was the digital equivalent of trying to fold a giant elephant until it was small enough to fit inside a tiny matchbox. The sheer scale of this task is even more mind-blowing when you realize how big the original uncompressed files probably were. Before the engineers worked their magic, those movie files were likely larger than the entire finished game itself. Every single frame of an epic scene, like Sephiroth's famous supernova attack, had to be carefully shrunk down so the PlayStation's hardware could actually read it. This attack alone was a multi-minute spectacle that pushed the console to its absolute breaking point, requiring the math behind the compression to be perfect so the game wouldn't crash or stutter. In the end, it was the brilliance of these engineers that allowed players to experience such a massive apocalyptic story. By using advanced mathematics over clever programming tricks, they ensured that Cloud Strife's iconic adventure could be enjoyed by millions. They proved that with enough creativity, you could overcome the physical limits of hardware, turning strings of numbers into a cinematic masterpiece that changed the gaming industry forever. While McDonald's in Japan surprisingly decided to sit on the sidelines during the massive launch of Final Fantasy VII in 1997, Pepsi Japan saw a golden opportunity and jumped right into the action. They teamed up with Square for a legendary marketing campaign that essentially brought the world of the game into the real world. This wasn't just a simple advertisement. It was soda cans that featured iconic artwork of Cloud Strife, Sephiroth, and the rest of the cast. For fans at the time, these weren't just drinks. They were instant collectibles that made it feel like a piece of Midgar had landed in their local shop. The marketing materials for this collaboration were incredibly bold, pitching the soda as a way for fans to actually taste the adventure. It was a clever way to blend the digital world of gaming with everyday life, creating a hype that felt much bigger than just a video game release. It turned the simple act of buying a soda into a shared cultural moment. For a short time in the late 90s, you could walk down a street in Tokyo, grab a Pepsi, and feel totally connected to the futuristic vibe of the game. It draws the lines between reality and the fantasy world of the PlayStation, making the game feel like a living, breathing part of the real world. Beyond just the cans, this campaign helped set the stage for how video games would be marketed for decades to come. It proved that gaming characters were just as recognizable as movie stars or professional athletes. Looking back, it is incredibly cool to think that you could literally hold a piece of gaming history in your hand for the piece of a soft drink. It remains one of the most nostalgic examples of how Final Fantasy mania took over the planet, proving that the game's influence was so strong it could even change the way people looked at a can of soda. If you've spent a lot of time in the Final Fantasy VII community, you probably already know that the game is a massive melting pot of different cultures and religions. It pulls ideas from things like Norse mythology, ancient Asian art, and a specific type of spiritual belief called Gnosticism. For the most hardcore fans, a lot of this might feel like old news, but if you think you know everything, there are still deep layers to this story that almost nobody talks about. To understand the really deep secrets, we first have to look at the religious roots that the game is built on. The most obvious connection is the villain himself, Sephiroth. His name isn't just a cool-sounding fantasy word. It comes directly from a branch of Jewish mysticism called the Kabbalah. To understand why this matters, we have to look at Gnosticism, which is basically a mix of ancient religious ideas and human psychology. In Gnosticism, people believed that the world wasn't run by a kind, loving God, but by a clumsy or even mean lesser god called the Demiurge. They believed the true good God was so far away that he didn't even know humans existed. We see this in Final Fantasy X with the monster Sin, but in Final Fantasy VII, the ideas go even deeper into the creation of the universe itself. In the teachings of the Kabbalah, there is a concept called the 10 Sephiroth. These are 10 different traits or vessels of God, referred to as Ein Sof, the infinite. The story goes that at the start of time, a brilliant light shone out and formed a being called Adam Kadmon. He was the original human, a giant spiritual being made in the image of the divine. Then, light poured out of Adam Kadmon into 10 different containers. However, the light was too powerful. 7 of those containers shattered into pieces, scattering divine sparks and broken shards throughout the void. This shattering is what supposedly created our physical universe. This is where it gets really interesting for Final Fantasy VII fans. While most people notice that Sephiroth shares a name with these vessels, very few people talk about his connection to Adam Kadmon, the primordial man. When you look at Sephiroth's ultimate goal in the game, which is to wound the planet, absorb all its energy, which is the life stream, and evolve into a godlike being, it mirrors the idea of trying to put those shattered pieces back together to become the original, perfect being again. He isn't just trying to be a king, He is trying to return to that ancient spiritual state of Adam Kadmon, becoming one with the entire planet to reclaim a power that was lost at the beginning of time. In the world of Jewish mysticism called the Kabbalah, there is a very important concept known as tikkun. This is a Hebrew word that basically means to fix, repair, or reunite things that have been broken. The idea is that since the universe was created from shattered pieces of light, it is the job of spiritual people to gather those pieces back together and return them to the body of the original man, Adam Kadmon. Once every spark of light is back where it belongs, everyone will be reunited in a perfect eternal paradise. When you look at the plot of Final Fantasy VII, it is almost impossible not to see how this religious idea shaped the reunion theory created by Professor Hojo. According to Hojo's theory in the game, anyone who has been injected with Sephiroth cells or Genova cells will feel an unstoppable urge to find one another and join back together into one single body. We see this play out through the entire game as the clones in black robes and even Cloud himself are pulled toward the North Crater. Sephiroth's ultimate goal, which he reveals at the Temple of the Ancients, is to use the gathered power to become one with the entire planet. He wants to wound the Earth so that all the souls in the livestream will rush to one spot, allowing him to absorb them and become a god. This merging of souls into Sephiroth's body is a dark, twisted version of the Tikkun, where all souls return to Adam Kadmon. It makes his name perfect because in the ancient teachings, the Sephiroth, his namesake, and the body of Adam Kadmon are essentially the same thing. The game hides other clever nods to these traditions in places you might not expect. For example, Tifa's bar is called Seventh Heaven, which sounds like a common phrase, but it actually has deep religious roots. In Jewish belief, there are 7 layers of heaven, and the 7th one is the highest possible level where God and his most powerful angels, the Seraphim, live. A seraph is described as an angel with 6 wings. If you look at the final boss of the game, say for Sephiroth, he is a towering being with exactly 6 wings. By naming the bar 7th Heaven, the developers were subtly hinting at the final divine battle that would take place at the end of the journey. Even Tifa's name itself seems to be a part of this puzzle. One of the 10 vessels in the Sephiroth is called Tiferet, sometimes spelled Tifereth. The qualities associated with this specific vessel are beauty, compassion, and balance, which are the exact traits Tifa shows as she tries to keep the team together and help Cloud find his true self. It shows that the creators didn't just pick names because they sounded cool. They built the characters' very personalities and roles around these ancient spiritual symbols. Building on the idea that Tifa's name comes from the vessel Tiferet, it is very likely that Aerith's name was inspired by the same source. You could look at Tifa and Aerith as 2 different sides of the same spiritual coin. They both represent the beauty and compassion found in that divine vessel, but they express it in different ways. Some fans even like to take this a step further and look at other vessels in the Sephirotic tree. For example, there is a vessel called Netzach and another called Hod, which is pronounced as Haud. If you squint at the names, you can see how Zack might have been pulled from Netzach and Cloud from Haud. It's a fun theory because Aerith was originally Zack's girlfriend and Tifa is Cloud's childhood friend, which would mean the characters are literally paired up according to these ancient spiritual maps. To take the mystery even deeper, some fans look at a practice called gematria. This is an ancient Jewish system where every letter in the alphabet is assigned a specific number. By adding up the numbers in a name, you get a code that supposedly reveals hidden truths. If you use a gematria calculator on the names of these divine vessels, some shocking coincidences pop up. For instance, the vessel Chokmah, which is wisdom, adds up to the number 118. Cloud's birthday happens to be August 11th, which is 8/11 by the calendar. Even crazier, if you calculate the value for Tiferet, you get 305. Tifa's birthday is May 3rd, which is 5/3 on the calendar. While it is hard to say if the developers at Square actually used a calculator to pick birthdays, it is a spooky coincidence that makes the game feel even more calculated and deep. However, it is important to take these math secrets with a grain of salt. While some of the numbers match up perfectly, others don't fit at all. For example, some fans claimed that the vessel chest matched Aerith's birthday on February the 7th, but when you actually run the numbers through a calculator, they don't seem to line up. This suggests that while the developers definitely used the names and themes of these religious ideas, the specific dates and math might just be a case of fans finding patterns where none were intended. Still, it adds a layer of treasure hunting to the game that keeps people talking decades later. Finally, we can look beyond just the names and into the bigger story of Gnosticism. In the belief system, there is a figure named Sophia, who was one of the 30 divine beings called Aeons, a word Final Fantasy fans know very well. Sophia wanted to create something of her own, but she ended up falling from heaven and accidentally creating a flawed, monstrous being called the Demiurge. You can see a massive parallel here with the character of Jenova. Like Sophia, Jenova fell from the heavens. When her cells were put into Sephiroth, she essentially gave birth to a monster. Sephiroth, in his final form, becomes the Demiurge, a powerful but cold and fake god who wants to rule over a world he didn't truly create. There's another fascinating way to look at the character of Jenova by comparing her to the highest power in ancient traditions. In Jewish mysticism, the infinite god is often called Ein Sof or Jenova. It's hard to ignore how similar the name Jehovah sounds to Jenova. In these spiritual stories, Jehovah created the first perfect being, Adam Kadmon. In the game, Jenova is essentially the source that created Sephiroth by providing the cells that made him special. Since we've already established that Sephiroth and Adam Kadmon represent the same idea of a perfect being, the parallel is clear. Jenova acts as a dark alien version of a creator god who brings a powerful new life form into the world. This leads us into one of the biggest debates in the history of the series, the secret connection between Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy X. For years, hardcore fans have noticed that these two games share very similar ideas, and there is one specific piece of evidence that everyone points to. In the game of Final Fantasy X-2, there is a young genius character actually named Shinra. He talks about his dream of extracting energy from the far plane, the place where souls go to, in order to use it as a power source for technology. This is exactly what the Shinra Electric Power Company does in Final Fantasy VII, by extracting Mako energy from the livestream. While this seems like a smoking gun, the creators of the game don't entirely agree on whether it's official. Kazushige Nojima, the man who wrote the stories for both games, has stated that in his own mind, they definitely take place in the same universe, with the world of Final Fantasy X being the distant past of Final Fantasy VII. However, the game's director, Yoshinori Kitase, has been more cautious, calling this an unofficial secret history, rather than a confirmed fact. Even though it's not official yet, a special hidden photo in the Final Fantasy VII Remake shows a character wearing a mask that looks exactly like the one worn by Shinra in Final Fantasy X Part 2. Suggesting the developers are leaning into this fan theory more than ever before. Even if we decide the games aren't officially in the same timeline, the concepts they use are almost identical. In Final Fantasy VII, the souls of the dead go to the livestream. In 10, they go to the far plane. Both are rivers of energy inside the planets that can be turned into physical objects. In FF7, this energy hardens into materia, which gives people magical powers. In FF10, the energy, called fireflies, hardens into spheres, which store memories and abilities. We even see this in Final Fantasy IX with the Mist, which is also made of the souls of the dead, used as fuel. Whether these worlds are physically connected or just share the same spiritual DNA, it's clear that the creators love the idea that life, death, and technology are all tied together by the energy of the soul. To unlock Tifa's different dresses in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you need to focus on Chapter 3. What Cloud says during this chapter directly decides which outfit Tifa will wear later in Chapter 9. The fastest and safest way to do this is to play through Chapter 3 and complete all the side quests. Near the end of the chapter, there is a scene called Alone at Last, where Cloud and Tifa talk in her bedroom. Before starting this scene, it's a good idea to make a manual save. After that conversation, you must finish the entire chapter. This part is very important. If you don't fully complete Chapter 3, the game will not save your dress choice. Once the chapter is complete, you can jump ahead to Chapter 9 and Tifa's dress will reflect the choice Cloud made earlier. Cloud is always the one who chooses Tifa's outfit. If you skip the side quest and never reach the point where she asks him for advice, the game will automatically give her the default mature dress. When all side quests are completed, Tifa will ask Cloud which outfit she should wear, and you'll be given 3 options. But sure, this is the classic red dress from the original PlayStation version of Final Fantasy VII. Sporty. In the English version, it's called Sporty, but the outfit is actually inspired by a traditional Chinese-style fighting dress. In the original Japanese version, it's described more like a combat outfit. Many fans believed this is a small reference to Chun-Li from Street Fighter. Exotic. This option gives Tifa a Japanese-inspired outfit with a more traditional look. If you don't complete the side quests and miss this conversation entirely, the game defaults to the mature dress, which is a direct nod to the fact that this was her only outfit in the original game. As a fun detail, Cloud and Tifa's outfits are designed to match each other in color and style. For example, Tifa's classic red dress matches Aerith's red outfit, and Cloud's blue and purple colors are reflected in Tifa's redesigned corset-style dress. When you explore Tifa's childhood bedroom in Final Fantasy VII Remake, or the Rebirth flashback, there are several small, easily missed details that tell a much bigger story. If you look closely next to her bed, you can find a pair of boots and a purse just sitting there. These aren't just random decorations. They are the exact same boots she wore during the famous Nibelheim incident 5 years prior, when she served as the guide for Cloud and Sephiroth while wearing her iconic cowboy outfit. This small wardrobe choice suggests something much more interesting about the way the developers are reimagining the world. By placing these Western-style boots in her room, it hints that the entire town of Nibelheim was originally envisioned with a stronger Wild West theme. In the brief glimpses we get of her town during the early flashbacks, you can see that the architecture and overall vibe lean heavily into this aesthetic. This Wild West take on Nibelheim is a beautiful and creative way to update one of the most famous locations in gaming history. In the original 1997 game, the town felt like a fairly standard mountain village, but this new direction gives it a distinct personality and a sense of history. It makes the town feel like a place where people had to be tough to survive, which fits perfectly with Tifa's character and her background as a skilled martial artist who grew up in the wilderness. By paying attention to these tiny environmental details, like a pair of boots on the floor, you can see how much thought the artists put into world building. They aren't just making a game, they are creating a culture for each location. It turns a simple bedroom into a piece of a larger puzzle, showing that the cowgirl look Tifa once had wasn't just a costume, it was a reflection of the town she called home. The story of Final Fantasy VII is essentially a giant puzzle where the pieces don't actually fit together until the very end. It is designed to be played twice because during your first time through, the game is intentionally lying to you. The main character, Cloud Strife, isn't just a cool hero. He is a deeply broken young man who is pretending to be something else because he is ashamed of who he really is. To understand Cloud, you have to understand his childhood. He grew up feeling like an outsider in his own town. He was deeply in love with Tifa, but he felt inferior to everyone else. He convinced himself that the only way Tifa would ever notice him or find him good enough was if he became a legendary hero. So, he left home to join Soldier, the elite military group. But there was a problem. He wasn't special. He failed the tryouts and ended up as just a regular low-level Shinra guard. While working as a grunt, he met a real soldier named Zack Fair. Zack was everything Cloud wished he could be. Brave, charismatic, and a great fighter. They became best friends. When they were sent on a mission to Nibelheim, which is Cloud's hometown, Cloud was so embarrassed by his failure that he wouldn't even take off his helmet. He didn't want Tifa to see that he was just a regular soldier. This mission is where everything went wrong. Sephiroth, the greatest hero of all, discovered he was a lab experiment and lost his mind. He burned the village to the ground and headed for the nearby reactor. In the chaos at the reactor, Sephiroth defeated both Zack and Tifa. Cloud, fueled by pure adrenaline and a need to protect Tifa, managed to do the impossible. He defeated Sephiroth. However, Cloud and Zack were both gravely injured. Instead of helping them, a scientist named Hojo took them to a basement and experimented on them for years, injecting them with alien cells and a high dose of Mako energy. This process was meant to turn them into puppets of the alien Genova. While Zack's body could handle it, Cloud's mind was completely shattered. Eventually, Zack managed to break them out, but Cloud was in a vegetative state. While escaping toward Midgar, Zack was killed by Shinra troops. Just before he died, He gave Cloud his Buster Sword and told him to live for both of them. This was the reboot moment for Cloud's brain. His mind was so broken and filled with shame that it literally rewrote his memories. He took Zack's stories, Zack's cool personality, and Zack's status as a soldier and convinced himself that he was the one who did all of those things. He built a fake Cloud Strife, a cool detached mercenary to hide the weak Cloud he hated. This is why Tifa is so confused when she finds Cloud at the start of the game. He looks like her childhood friend, and he knows secrets only Cloud would know, like their promise at the water tower. But his personality is completely wrong. She stays quiet because she's scared and confused, but the tension builds until they reach the North Crater. There, Sephiroth finally reveals the truth. He destroys Cloud's fake identity, showing him that he was never a soldier. This causes Cloud's entire world to collapse, and he falls into a catatonic state in the live stream. The real resolution happens when Tifa enters the live stream with him. Together, they walk through his actual memories, stripping away the lies. For the first time, Tifa sees the real Cloud, the shy, insecure boy who just wanted her to be proud of him. She accepts him for who he truly is, not for the hero he pretended to be. This is the moment Cloud finally grows up. He stops trying to be a copy of Zack and starts being a version of himself that incorporates Zack's lessons. He finds the strength to be a leader not because he's a super soldier, but because he finally likes himself. Many Final Fantasy fans have been talking about how the Punisher mode feels very different in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth compared to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and a lot of players seem to agree that the change isn't entirely for the better. In the remake, Punisher mode gave Cloud a very strong offensive stance, where he moved forward with powerful attacks and almost felt unstoppable. Players liked how the animations flowed and how every hit seemed meaningful, giving a satisfying feeling of power when Cloud was slashing enemies. For many, it almost felt like a whirlwind of strength that was both fun and effective in combat, and some even joked that they rarely switched out of it because it worked so well. In contrast, the version seen in Rebirth feels noticeably different. A common complaint is that Cloud doesn't move forward while attacking in Punisher mode anymore, meaning his attacks sometimes miss if enemies are pushed back or moved away. Some players describe it as Cloud standing more or less in one place and swinging left and right, which makes it feel oddly less impactful and less satisfying than before. Many people in the discussion felt that this change made the mode feel weaker and less useful, especially compared to how strong it was in the remake. These fans say that Cloud doesn't have that momentum behind his swings. Punisher mode doesn't feel like a great offensive choice in many fights anymore. A few commenters also pointed out that in Rebirth, Operator mode has become more valuable and dynamic, with new moves, ranged attacks, and mobility options that make Cloud feel faster and more effective when not in Punisher mode. Because of this, some players said they end up using Punisher mode only in specific situations instead of constantly, as many did in Remake. Others still enjoy aspects of the new Punisher mode, especially its counterattack potential or how it fits with bits of Rebirth's combat. But overall, the general feeling in the thread was that the new version just doesn't hit as hard or feel as smooth as the old one. This has led to some playful but frustrated requests from the community, including wishes for mods that might bring back the old Punisher mode animation and feel in Rebirth, even though it's technically very different under the hood. In short, while many players enjoy the overall combat improvements in Rebirth, there is a strong sentiment among some fans that Punisher mode lost some of the satisfying power and momentum it had in Remake, making it feel less exciting and less useful in everyday battles for Cloud. The original Final Fantasy VII from 1997 and the modern Final Fantasy VII Remake are very different experiences, even though they share characters and some major story moments. One of the first things people mention is that the original game tells its story and presents its world in a classic JRPG way, with turn-based battles, simpler visuals, and a more serious, somewhat darker tone. In contrast, Remake feels much more like a modern action RPG with real-time combat, flashy visuals, and cinematic storytelling. Because of this, a lot of fans feel that Remake isn't just a straight update of the original. It's more like a reimagining or reinterpretation rather than a one-to-one remake. Some players in the thread explain that Remake assumes you already know part of the original story. In other words, if you've never played the 1997 game, certain parts of the remake might feel confusing or strange because they reference ideas and events from the original. There was also debate about the structure of the remake. Because the remake only covers the Midgar portion of the original game, which took just a few hours in the 1997 version, the developers expanded that section into a full-length game with additional scenes, extra character moments, and new plot threads that weren't in the original. This has led to mixed feelings. Some people appreciate the depth and added content, while others feel it can sometimes slow down the pacing or feel too different from the simplicity of the original experience. Another point brought up in comments is that remake changes how some story elements play out, especially later in the game. While the original was more linear and straightforward, the remake version starts introducing alternate timeline concepts and events that don't match the original plot exactly. Some people call this a reinterpretation or sequel, meaning it begins as a remake but then expands into something new that could become its own story separate from the original. Overall, the consensus in that discussion was that both games are worth playing, but they are different, and understanding one can help you appreciate the other more. The original offers a classic JRPG experience and foundational story, while Remake provides a modern, more cinematic retelling that expands on familiar events in new ways, for better or worse, depending on your preferences. In the original Final Fantasy VII, obtaining the powerful Quadra Magic Materia usually requires you to spend hours breeding a specialized chocobo, specifically a green or blue one. This chocobo can cross mountains or rivers to reach a hidden cave. However, there is a legendary secret trick that allows you to skip all the hard work by using a clever movement glitch with your airship, the Highwind. To pull this off, you first need to be at the point in the story where you have full control over the Highwind. You'll want to fly over to the far southwestern edge of the world map. There, you will see a small isolated cave tucked away on a grassy cliff. Normally, the game prevents the Highwind from landing on such a tiny, uneven piece of land. But by using a specific set of buttons, you can trick the game's physics into letting you park there. Start by flying toward the medial area and look for the specific raised cliff where the cave is located. Fly as close to the edge of that cliff as possible. The goal is to position the Highwind so it is facing directly south. Once you are lined up, you need to be very precise. Press the button to land and almost at the exact same time, give the R1 button a very light quick tap. This tiny adjustment causes the airship to shiver or shift its position just enough as it descends. If you timed it correctly, the Highwind will land in a way that looks impossible. Half of it will be resting on the solid cliffside, while the other half hangs off over the ocean. Because the game thinks you're on solid ground, Cloud will be able to hop out of the airship and walk right over to the cave entrance. Inside, you can simply pick up the Quadra Magic Materia without ever having to feed or raise a single chocobo. This trick is a huge time saver for players who want to get straight to the late game power without the farming grind. To get the legendary gold chocobo, you have to follow a very specific family tree of breeding. It can be a long process, but it is the only way to reach the most powerful items in the game, the Knights of the Round Summon. Here is a step-by-step guide to the whole process, explained simply. Phase 1. Creating the blue and green chocobos. The journey begins at the medial area. You need to catch 2 chocobos that the stable boy describes as good or great. It is very important that you get 1 male and 1 female. Once you have them, take them back to the stables and feed them plenty of high-quality greens to boost their stats. Before you breed them, head over to the gold saucer and race them until they both reach A rank. When they are ready, breed them using a carob nut. You can find these nuts by fighting a monster called Vlacorados, which lives on the island south of the northern continent. This first pairing should give you either a blue chocobo, which can run across shallow water, or a green chocobo, which can run over mountains. Now, you have to be patient. It takes a while before the parents can mate again, so go explore or fight some battles. Once they are ready, breed them a second time with another carob nut to get the color you didn't get the first time. You eventually need 1 of each color, and they must be of opposite sexes. Phase 2. Now that you have a blue and green chocobo, you need to wait for them to grow up. Usually, fighting around 10 battles will give them enough time to mature. Just like before, take both of them to Gold Saucer and race them until they are A rank. Once they are top tier racers, breed them together using another carob nut. If everything goes right, you will receive a black chocobo. This special bird combines the powers of its parents, meaning it can run over both mountains and shallow water. Phase 3. The final step to gold. To get to the finish line, you need to find a wonderful chocobo. Go to the northern continent and look for chocobo tracks in the snow. Make sure your Chocobo lure materia is leveled up to at least 3 stars to give you the best chance. Catch a Chocobo and bring it back. If the stable boy calls it wonderful, you've found the right one. The final recipe is to breed your A-rank black Chocobo with your A-rank wonderful Chocobo. Again, they must be opposite sexes. For this final mating, you need a Zio nut. You can find these on Goblin Island, which is a small forested island east to the northern continent. If the stars align, you will finally hatch a gold Chocobo. This bird is the ultimate traveler. It can run across the deep ocean, allowing you to reach any secret spot on the map. If you don't get a gold one on the first try, don't worry. Just reload your save and try the breeding again until it works. After finishing a full hard mode run, I ended up discovering a really strong setup partway through the game that made things much easier. The core idea is to pair the enemy skill materia with HP absorb, specifically using the enemy skill I'll Get Aura. Once I started using this, it almost completely replaced the need for ice materia in my build. What makes I'll Get Aura so powerful in hard mode is how many things it does at once. It deals constant damage to enemies around you, even when you're blocking, and with HP absorb link, it heals you continuously. The healing is actually faster than regen, and the best part is, it doesn't use any MP at all. If you also equip First Strike, you can activate I'll Get Aura right at the start of every fight. Add Steadfast Block, stack regen on top of it, and suddenly, normal enemies barely feel like a threat anymore. You can block, heal, and damage enemies at the same time, which makes you extremely hard to kill. Another big advantage is that I'll Get Aura scales with your magic attack stat. The higher your magic, the more damage the aura does. And since healing is based on damage dealt, that also means more healing. Because of this, weapons like the Mithril Saber, along with magic up materia and optional accessories like platinum earrings, all make this build incredibly effective. It greatly reduces how much MP you need to spend on healing during regular encounters, letting you save MP almost entirely for boss fights. There are also some nice extra benefits. If an enemy grabs or binds you, I'll Get Aura keeps you damaging them and healing you anyway, which can actually save you in situations where you'd normally be helpless. It's not a guaranteed win button. Hard mode will still punish mistakes, but overall it makes MP management almost a non-issue and makes progressing through chapters much smoother. After experimenting more, I realized there's even more depth to this setup. From testing I'll Get Aura and Spirit Siphon, it seems that enemy skills scale with magic power. I'll Get Aura also changes your attacks to deal ice damage, but it doesn't add extra damage the way elemental materia does. From testing, normal physical sword hits didn't trigger healing on their own, but the healing mainly comes from the Aura Ticks and Spirit Siphon. The really strong part is that I'll Get Aura and Spirit Siphon stack their healing effects. When both are active, the constant health regeneration can make many enemies almost harmless. Against normal enemies, this setup can overwhelm them with pressure and stagger so quickly that they barely get a chance to fight back. Crowd control makes this even stronger. Sleep is extremely useful here. If an enemy isn't immune, you can build up 2 ATB bars, put them to sleep, cast haste, refresh your buffs, then activate I'll Get Aura. From there, go on the offensive until you reach 2 ATB bars again and use Spirit Siphon. Between sword attacks, aura damage, and siphon ticks, most regular enemies will be pressured and staggered so often that they stop attacking altogether. For reference, at around level 35 with roughly 250 magic, I'll Get Aura was healing about 18 HP per tick, while Spirit Siphon healed around 180 HP per tick on a single enemy. These healing effects also stack when you're fighting multiple enemies, making the build even more effective in group fights. Overall, while it didn't completely remove the challenge from hard mode, this setup is extremely strong, especially for MP conservation, survivability, and crowd control. It made hard mode feel much more manageable and rewarding without completely breaking the game. I recently tested a very powerful and surprisingly effective setup built around the enemy skill materia combined with HP absorb, and it ended up being far stronger than I expected. The main idea is to use the self-destruct enemy skill in a way that lets you survive the explosion, fully heal yourself, and rapidly charge your limit break gauge all at the same time. To make this work, I linked enemy skill and HP absorb in one paired materia slot so that the damage dealt by self-destruct heals you instead of killing you. In another linked slot, I used subversion plus warding, which prevents the instant death effect that normally comes with self-destruct. On top of that, I equipped a weapon with reprieve ability which allows you to survive a fatal hit with 1 HP. By also stacking up magic materia and using a high magic attack weapon, the self-destruct damage becomes strong enough to fully heal you after the explosion, all while massively filling your limit break gauge. This setup becomes even more powerful when combined with the Goter Damarung accessory, which starts battle with a full limit break gauge. Although Goter Damarung is an endgame item, the important thing to note is that self-destruct itself is available much earlier, meaning the strategy can be useful long before the very end of the game. With the right timing, you can chain huge explosions, instant healing, and frequent limit breaks in difficult fights. For equipment, the Iron Blade is ideal, because it comes with a reprieve ability, which is essential for surviving the self-destruct damage. The Fury Ring is another key piece, as it boosts damage more than most physical or magical accessories in the game. This extra damage directly increases how much you heal and how fast your limit break fills. The most important materials for this build are enemy skill plus HP absorb, subversion plus warding, and 2 magic up materia. These pieces work together to ensure survival, maximum damage, and increased healing and limit break gain. Without this exact combination, the strategy doesn't work nearly as well. After further testing, I discovered that self-destruct can reach the maximum damage cap of 9,999 when it hits an enemy's elemental weakness. For example, if you pair lightning plus elemental on a weapon and use self-destruct against an enemy or boss that is weak to lightning, and your magic attack is high enough, it will deal full damage and heavily charge your limit break gauge. Using this method, I was able to wipe out the brain pod in Chapter 17 on hard mode with a single explosion when they grouped together. Finally, to get even more value from this setup, it helps to use self-destruct while an enemy is staggered. Staggered enemies give a bonus to limit break gain, and when combined with the massive damage from self-destruct, this can result in an instant or near instant limit break, even if your magic stat isn't extremely high. Overall, this build turns self-destruct from a risky gimmick into a reliable tool for damage, survival, and limit break generation, making it especially useful in hard mode and challenging encounters. When you are exploring the outside of Don Corneo's mansion in the Wall Market area, most players are focused on getting inside to rescue Tifa. However, if you take a moment to look at the scattered boxes and shipments piled up near the entrance, you can spot a very specific and creepy detail. Among the delivery packages waiting to be brought inside is a large iron structure shaped like a cross. This isn't just a random piece of metal. It is an exact match for the iron restraint device found inside Corneo's sex dungeon or torture chamber later in the game. Seeing it sitting outside in a delivery pile suggests a darkly funny yet unsettling bit of environmental storytelling. It implies that Don Corneo actually spent his wealth ordering custom-made equipment for his basement. The presence of this item outside could mean a few things. Perhaps the one he currently has is worn out and he's ordered a replacement, or he's expanding his collection to accommodate more prisoners. By including this detail in the delivery area, the developers are showing just how organized and frequent Don Corneo's creepy hobbies are. It's a subtle way of telling the player exactly what kind of person Corneo is before they even step through the front door. In Chapter 13 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, players have the chance to speak with Andrea Rodea, the owner of the Honeybee Inn back in Wall Market. Their short but meaningful conversation feels like more than just a polite check-in. When Andrea asks Cloud if he found what he was looking for, and Cloud confirms he did, Andrea's response is a firm piece of advice. Good, now never let it go again. On the most basic level, this dialogue is about the immediate plot. Andrea provided the makeover and the dance-off that allowed Cloud to sneak into Don Corneo's mansion to save Tifa. In this light, Andrea is talking about Tifa herself, telling Cloud that now that he has rescued her and reunited with his childhood friend, he should make sure to protect her and keep her close. It's a touching moment that acknowledges the bond between the two characters. However, there is a much deeper way to read this scene. Many fans believe Andrea is actually talking about Cloud's identity. Throughout the War Market arc, Andrea pushes Cloud to embrace a different side of himself and to be who he wants to be, regardless of what others think. By saying "never let it go again," Andrea might be referring to the small spark of the real Cloud that started to peek through the tough mercenary act during their dance. He's telling Cloud to hold on to his true self and his own agency. What makes this even more interesting is how it seems to flip a famous moment from the original 1997 game. In that version, The character Ketchi gives Cloud a fortune that says, "What you pursue will be yours, but you will lose something dear." This was a dark prophecy that eventually came true when Cloud reached the Forgotten Capital and Aerith was lost. Andrea's words feel like a direct, hopeful response to that old prophecy. While the original game focuses on the tragedy of losing something dear, Andrea focuses on the power of holding on. It creates a beautiful bit of dual meaning. It's a literal instruction to keep Tifa safe, but also a spiritual command to Cloud to never lose his grip on his heart and his identity again, especially with the difficult path that lies ahead. In a very specific moment during the Sector 6 story arc, Final Fantasy VII Remake hides a secret area that most players walk right past. When you finally gain control of Aerith inside Don Corneo's mansion, you have a brief window of time where you can backtrack. If you return to the very first room where she and Cloud were held before being summoned by the Dawn, you can discover a hidden entrance leading down to the mansion's sex dungeon or torture chamber. This hidden path is the only way to reach a treasure chest that is otherwise completely inaccessible for the rest of the game. To get inside, Aerith has to interact with a specific floor mechanism, a pressure plate marked with the Japanese kanji symbol for up and down. When she steps on this plate to activate the secret door, the game plays a unique specialized animation of her shifting her weight and stepping onto the mechanism. What makes this detail so special for fans is that this specific stepping animation was created solely for this one room. You won't see Aerith move like that anywhere else in the entire game, regardless of how many miles you walk or how many battles you fight. It shows an incredible level of dedication from the developers. They spent the time and the resource to animate a unique moment just for a secret area that a large portion of the audience might never even find. Finding this room is a great reward for players who love to explore every corner of the map. Not only do you get the items inside the chest, but you also get to see a rare bit of character animation that was tucked away as a reward for curiosity. It's another example of how the remake uses simple puzzles to make Corneo's mansion feel like a place filled with traps, secrets, and hidden levers. After the famous dance scene at the Honeybee Inn, most players feel a rush to get to Don Corneo's mansion and finish the mission. However, if you take the time to run around Wall Market while Cloud is still wearing his dress, you can discover an incredible amount of hidden content. The developers actually wrote unique dialogue for almost every major character and many random citizens just to react to Cloud's new look. If you head back to the Honeybee Inn, the rewards for exploration are everywhere. The receptionist will go out of his way to gush about how much he loved your dance moves. If you go inside, you can find Andrea Rodea, who reassures Cloud that his mercenary gear is being delivered safely by Leslie. You can even find Johnny's father sleeping in one of the side rooms. The most bizarre detail, however, is in the room where you previously saw Palmer. In this part of the game, it's occupied by a random guy and a honey girl engaged in some doctor-themed roleplay. The girl is holding a massive bee-colored syringe. What's amazing is that the developers created a completely unique 3D model for that syringe just for this one tiny optional joke. It's a level of detail that most players will never even notice. Depending on which side quests you finished earlier, your interactions with the town's leaders will change. If you did Madame M's side quests, you'll find her and Sam together. She reveals she made Cloud's dress at the same time as Aerith's because Andrea asked her to. She now considers Cloud a true friend. Sam, however, is a bit confused by the whole cross-dressing thing, but Madame M quickly tells him to be more open-minded. If you did Sam's request instead, you can find him at his ranch. He reveals that he was actually the one who donated the dress to Andrea in the first place. If you finished the Burning Thigh Squat Challenge, Jules will tell you he ran all the way to the inn just to see your dance. He's impressed but tells you to come back for a workout once you're in normal clothes. The rest of the town, on the other hand, has plenty to say about Cloud's deadly beauty. The young Shinra researcher won't even realize he's talking to Cloud. He simply says he's having a strange emotional response because Cloud looks so beautiful. The weapons dealer has one of the best lines in the game, telling Cloud, "Your beauty is deadlier than any weapon in this shop." The Colosseum gatekeeper recognizes Cloud, but politely asks him to change back into his regular gear before fighting again, even though he thinks a battle dress would be hilarious to watch. Near the clothing shop, you can find a man who is constantly staring at every girl who walks by. If you keep talking to them as Lady Cloud, his girlfriend gets angrier and angrier until she finally loses her temper at him for being such a creep. Even Johnny makes a quick appearance for a chat if you track him down. This entire section of the game shows just how much the developers loved the Wall Market legacy. They didn't just recreate the scene, they made the entire town react in a way that feels funny, inclusive, and incredibly detailed. In the original Final Fantasy VII, unlocking the brooding secret character, Vincent Valentine, requires a bit of detective work and a steady hand in the creepy Shinra mansion located in Nibelheim. To find him, head to the second floor and locate the safe in the top right room, where you must input the combination 36 10 59 97 within a tight 20-second time limit. The trick is to turn the dial right to 36, left to 10, right to 59, and then continue moving right to 97 without ever overshooting the numbers or changing direction mid-turn. Successfully opening the safe triggers a difficult boss fight against a creature called Lost Number, which changes its physical or magical defenses halfway through the battle. Using status-inflicting limit breaks like Cloud's Cross Slash or Aerith's Seal Evil can help freeze him in place, while the Choco or the Morg Summon provides a great advantage. Once defeated, the boss drops the basement key and Red 13's final limit break, Cosmo Memory. With the key in your possession, descend into the mansion's basement and head toward the library, where you might even have a brief, chilling encounter with Sephiroth, but your main goal is the side room filled with coffins. Use the key to open the central coffin and speak to Vincent. He will initially be dismissive and return to his sleep, but the secret is to be persistent. Engage him in conversation about Sephiroth and his past until he goes back to sleep. Then simply begin to leave the basement. As you walk away, Vincent will call out to you, deciding that his quest for atonement aligns with your journey, and he will officially join your party. If he doesn't stop you, just go back and speak to him again to ensure you've exhausted his dialogue, and soon the legendary marksman will be at your side. Recruiting the energetic ninja Yuffie Kisaragi in the original Final Fantasy VII is a bit of a test of patience and social skills. Unlike most characters who join during the story, Yuffie is a hidden character who must be tracked down in the wild. You can first find her in the forested areas near Fort Condor or Junon, and if you miss her there, she also appears later in the Gongaga jungle. She only shows up as a random encounter in about 1 out of every 8 battles, so you might need to run around in circles for a while before the music changes and a mystery ninja attacks. The fight itself is quite easy as she has less than 500 HP, but the real challenge begins the moment the battle ends. Once you defeat her, you will find yourself in a grassy field with a save point nearby. Whatever you do, do not touch that save point. If you try to save your game or open your menu, Yuffie will take the opportunity to rob you and disappear into the trees. Instead, you must stay focused and speak to her directly. To convince her to join your crew, you must have to navigate a specific dialogue gauntlet without making a single mistake. If you pick the wrong answer at any point, she will steal some of your gil and run away. To win her over, follow this exact script. When she demands a rematch, tell her you are not interested. When she mocks you and asks if you're scared of her, respond with petrified. As she gets frustrated and threatens to leave, shout, "Wait a second." When she finally asks if you actually want her to come along, say, "That's right." Finally, when she agrees to join, end the conversation with, "Let's hurry on." If you follow these steps perfectly, she'll finally join your team. Interestingly, if you did mess up earlier and she stole your money, she will claim she gave it all back when she rejoins. But if you check your wallet, you'll find she's actually kept half of it as a finder's fee. Final Fantasy VII Remake is actually a stealth sequel rather than a standard remake. According to this theory, the original 1997 game is a completed timeline that has already occurred, and certain characters, specifically Sephiroth and Aerith, seem to have memories or visions of those past events. This suggests that Sephiroth is attempting to use his connection to the livestream to rewrite history and avoid his original defeat. Fans point to the fact that Sephiroth appears much earlier in the story than he did in the original game as proof that he is actively interfering with the timeline to manipulate Cloud. The introduction of the Whispers of Fate is the most controversial and analyzed part of the story. These ghostly entities act as the guardians of destiny, physically intervening whenever the characters drift too far away from the events of the original 1997 script. For example, if a character is supposed to die but survives, or if Cloud is trying to leave Midgar too early, The whispers appear to force the correct outcome. By the end of the game, the party decides to fight these entities, effectively killing Destiny. This serves as a meta-commentary by the developers, signaling to the players that the story is no longer bound to the original plot and that future installments can go in entirely new directions. The ending introduces a massive twist involving Zack Fair, Cloud's mentor, who originally died before the start of the game. In a shocking cinematic moment, Zack is shown surviving his final battle, but a subtle detail reveals that this is happening in a parallel reality. Fans notice that a snack bag flying past in the wind features a different design for Stamp, the Shinra mascot dog, indicating that Zack exists in a separate timeline where history branched off. This has led to intense speculation that the trilogy will eventually feature a multiverse or world merge scenario, where different versions of these characters might meet or influence each other's worlds. While many fans find these changes exciting, some players feel that the story has become unnecessarily convoluted, moving away from the grounded themes of environmentalism and loss found in the original and toward a confusing plot filled with time travel and alternative dimensions. There is also a concern that by allowing characters who originally died to survive, the game loses its emotional stakes. Furthermore, newcomers to the series expressed that the ending felt gatekept, as it relies heavily on the players knowing exactly what was supposed to happen in the 1997 game to understand why the changes are significant. To understand what is happening in the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, we have to look at the livestream in a new way. It isn't just a river of green energy. It is the planet's memory and the very lifeblood. In the livestream, time doesn't exist. There is no past or future. Everything happens all at once in one big eternal moment. When people die, their souls return to the planet, but they don't just disappear. Instead, they go on a journey to accept their death. During this journey, their memories, hopes, and even the what-ifs of their lives create small dreamlike worlds. These aren't necessarily physical parallel universes like in a sci-fi movie. They are spiritual spaces created by the planet's energy. Zack is a key part of this spiritual puzzle. Because he died saving Cloud, his soul remains very strong within the livestream, but it's divided. We see several different versions of Zack's story, marked by different designs of the cartoon dog Stamp, like a terrier, a pug, or a beagle. These represent different choices he made in these dream worlds. While Zack is trying to figure out where he is and why things fell off, he's actually carrying the broken parts of Cloud's soul and Aerith's stolen memories. He's waiting for the moment when he can help his friend Cloud in the real world, acting as a spiritual bridge between life and death. In the physical world, things get very dark as the group reaches the Temple of the Ancients. Cloud is struggling because Sephiroth is treating him like a puppet. When Sephiroth shows up to take the black materia, he reveals that the materia Cloud is holding is just a key. The true black materia is hidden in the space between worlds, and after this, in a tragic moment, Cloud completely loses control of his own body and hands the materia over to Sephiroth. This shows us that Cloud isn't just a hero, he is deeply compromised, and his mind is constantly being rewritten by Sephiroth's influence. After falling into a void, Cloud and Aerith experience a final, quiet moment together in a dreamlike version of Sector 5. Aerith knows her time is running out, so she uses his date to say goodbye and give Cloud the white materia that contains all her memories and the prayer needed to save the planet. She understands that she must die to protect the world, but she wants Cloud to have the tools to finish the fight. She pushes Cloud back into the real world through a portal, knowing that Sephiroth is coming for her. The ending of Rebirth is confusing because we are seeing two things happen at the same time. When Sephiroth drops from the ceiling to strike Aerith, Cloud tries to stop him. For a split second, we see a rainbow effect. This is Cloud's soul successfully blocking the blade in a spiritual sense. In that world, he saved her. However, the game then shows us the bloody reality. In the physical world, Sephiroth's sword hit its mark. Aerith is physically dead, and the rest of the party, Tifa, Barrett, etc., they see her body on the ground. Cloud's mind, however, is so broken that he cannot accept this. He's living in a self-created delusion where he saved her, and she's still standing right there. During the massive final battle, the spiritual and physical worlds collide. Zack Fair is guided by the planet's whispers to stand side by side with Cloud one last time. This is a huge moment because it shows their souls resonating together. They fight Sephiroth across different layers of reality. Even though they defeat this version of Sephiroth, the two friends are separated again. Zack is sent back into the live stream, and Cloud returns to his friends. Aerith even appears spiritually to help Cloud finish the fight, proving that her consciousness lives on, even if her body is gone. The most chilling part of the ending is how Cloud behaves after the battle. While everyone else is crying and mourning Aerith by the water, Cloud is acting like nothing is wrong. He sees Aerith standing next to him, talking to him, and telling him goodbye. To Cloud, she's still alive. Tifa looks at Cloud with deep worry because she realizes he is completely losing his grip on reality. He even sees a crack in the sky that no one else sees. He has tucked the black materia away, thinking he is ready for the final journey north, but he doesn't realize he's walking right into Sephiroth's trap. On the political side of things, we learn that the war between Shinra and Wutai is being manipulated from the shadows. The character, Glenn, who has been talking to Rufus Shinra, is actually a fake. He's a manifestation of Jenova using the memories of a dead, angry man. Sephiroth wants this war to happen because war means death, and death fills the livestream with resentful souls, or the Dark Whispers. These angry souls give Sephiroth more power. He's essentially trying to farm the planet's misery so he can become a god. This theory suggests that the entire remake trilogy is a deep dive into the lore established in the movie Advent Children. It isn't about changing the story into a multiverse. It's about showing that the people we love truly never leave us as long as their spirit is in the livestream. Aerith is now a part of the planet, watching over Cloud and her friends from the other side. The final part of the trilogy will likely be about Cloud finally accepting the truth of Aerith's death and fixing his shattered mind so he can truly defeat Sephiroth once and for all. It's a story about memory, grief, and the invisible connections that bind us all together. In the world of Final Fantasy VII, even the smallest details can tell a huge story, and this is especially true for the history of Tifa Lockhart's cat, Fluffy. While many fans know Tifa as a tough fighter, her background in Nibelheim is filled with a deep love for animals. This specific pet has become a bridge between different games and books in the series. Originally appearing in the mobile game Before Crisis, Fluffy was shown as Tifa's loyal companion during her younger years. By the time we get to the novel, Traces of Two Pasts, and the game Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we see how much that cat meant to her, serving as a symbol of her innocent life before her hometown was destroyed. If you explore the Lockhart residence in Nibelheim during the flashback sequences or the later visits in Rebirth, you can find a very specific and touching Easter egg, Fluffy's food bowl. The developers went out of their way to include this small household item to reward fans who have kept up with the deeper lore. Finding the bowl is a bittersweet moment for players because it reminds us that while Tifa lost her home, her father, and her neighbors in the fire caused by Sephiroth, these small domestic objects are all that remain of her childhood. It makes the world feel much more lived in and real, showing that the characters had normal, quiet lives with pets, just like we do. Including the food bowl is a great example of how the remake and Rebirth developers use environmental storytelling. You don't need a long cutscene to explain Tifa's love for her cat. You just need to see that bowl sitting in the corner of her kitchen. For fans of the book Traces of Two Pasts, seeing the bowl in the game is a aha moment that pretty much confirms the stories they read are officially part of the game's universe. It connects Tifa's past struggles to her current journey, making her quest to take down Shinra feel even more personal, as they were the ones responsible for taking away the simple, happy life represented by the little cat bowl. This connection reveals a truly dark and cruel layer to how Sephiroth chooses to torment Cloud. In the original 1997 game, we knew that the Nibelheim incident was traumatic, but the remake and Rebirth trilogy adds a psychological edge by showing exactly how Sephiroth haunts Cloud's mind. When Cloud's mother, Claudia Strife, is trapped inside her burning home, her final act of love is to tell her son to run away and survive. Her words, "Run away, Cloud. You have to leave. You have to live," were meant to be a blessing of protection, a mother's desperate wish for her child to stay safe. However, Sephiroth, who has access to Cloud's memories through their connection via Jenova cells, takes those precious private words and turns them into a weapon. Early in Final Fantasy VII Remake, Right after the first bombing mission, Sephiroth appears to Cloud during a panic attack and whispers those exact same lines. By repeating Claudia's dying words, Sephiroth is mocking Cloud's greatest trauma. He is essentially stealing the voice of Cloud's mother to manipulate him. This is why Cloud reacts with such a raw, unfiltered rage, calling Sephiroth a bastard in that moment. It's not just because Sephiroth is a villain, it's because he is violating the memory of Cloud's mother. The developers used this parallel to show just how much control Sephiroth has over Cloud's perception of reality. By the time we see the actual explosion of Claudia's house in Rebirth, the player finally understands why those words sounded so familiar yet so chilling when Sephiroth said them earlier. It proves that Sephiroth isn't just trying to destroy the world, he's specifically trying to break Cloud's spirit by poisoning his happiest and saddest moments. It turns a moment of motherly love into a permanent scar, ensuring that every time Cloud thinks of his mother's final wish, he also thinks of the monster who took her away. This is a fantastic observation that highlights how the developers are using environmental design to hint at Cloud's fractured mental state. In the original 1997 game, the path down to the secret basement of the Shinra mansion was a long spiral staircase. However, in the remake series, this has been replaced by a modern elevator. The strange part, as you noticed, is that the elevator doesn't just open into the room. It lets you onto a tiny, mini spiral staircase that seems to exist for no logical architectural reason. From the perspective of somebody already standing in the basement, it looks like you just walk down a normal staircase, with the elevator completely hidden or non-existent. From a construction standpoint, it makes zero sense to build an elevator that requires you to walk down a few extra spiral steps before reaching the floor. If Shinra went through the trouble of installing a high-tech elevator in a spooky old mansion, it would have had it go straight to the basement level. The fact that the elevator disappears once you are actually inside the basement suggests that what Cloud is seeing might not even be physical reality. In Final Fantasy VII, Cloud's memories are a jumbled mess of things he actually saw and things he thinks he saw. This weird architectural glitch feels like a visual representation of a memory gap or a loading error in Cloud's brain. This is likely a deliberate breadcrumb left by the developers to show that Cloud is merging two different versions of the truth. His real memory, from when he was a regular Shinra guard, might remember the modern elevator, but the fake memory he adopted, the one where he thinks he was a high-ranking soldier like Zack, might be trying to pull in the classic imagery of the spiral staircase. By putting both in the same place, an elevator that leads to a tiny staircase, the game is showing us that Cloud's mind is literally trying to stitch two different versions of history together, and the seams are starting to show. Rather than a simple Easter egg to honor the original game, this architectural inconsistency serves as a warning to the player. It suggests that the environment we are exploring in the Nibelheim flashback might be a reconstruction rather than a perfect recording of the past. It's a subtle way of telling the audience that Cloud is an unreliable narrator. If he can't even remember if there was a staircase or an elevator, what else about that fateful night in Nibelheim is he getting wrong? It sets the stage perfectly for the future reveal of what actually happened in that basement. I've been saving the best for last all this while, so let's finally talk about someone, or rather a group of people, that are very dear to my heart: the Turks. In most adventure stories, villains are often written as one-dimensional monsters who are purely evil and impossible to relate to. While it can be satisfying to defeat an irredeemable bad guy, it can also get a bit boring if every antagonist feels the same. However, fortunately for players, and mostly for me, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth takes a different approach. The villains in this game have distinct, colorful personalities that make them feel like real people rather than just obstacles to overcome. The game does a great job of showing that even the bad guys have a life when they aren't busy trying to stop the heroes. This human side of the villains is best seen during the moments when they think nobody is watching. For example, again, the Turks, Shinra's elite tactical squad. They are incredibly intimidating and dangerous when you face them in combat. However, when you explore the city of Junon, you get a glimpse of their personal lives. After Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith defeat the young, hot-headed Elena in battle, you can actually find her sitting at a local bar instead of plotting world domination. She is simply stuck there drowning her sorrows in a drink. feeling embarrassed and upset that she lost the fight. It's a very relatable moment that makes her feel less like a boss fight and more like a coworker having a bad day at the office. In the same chapter, the game offers a hilarious look at my favorite Turk, Rude, a tough, silent enforcer who is famous for his beautiful shaved head and sunglasses. If you look around carefully, you can find him relaxed in a very specific, exclusive establishment called the Bald Bar. Secret between you and me, I actually shaved my head just like Rude for this one purpose of cosplaying him, but hey, we can talk about that another day. Anyways, as the name suggests, Bald Bar, it's a place specifically for men with no hair to hang out and enjoy themselves. Having food, drinks, even singing. Seeing high-level Shinra assassins taking a break in such a silly, niche location adds a ton of heart to his character. It reminds the player that even though he works for a corrupt organization, he still has his own hobbies and a sense of humor. By including these small details, the developers make the world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth feel more alive. These antagonists aren't just robots waiting for the player to show up. They are characters who are friends, go to bars, and deal with their own failures. This makes the rivalry between Cloud's group and the Turks feel more personal and interesting. It shows that even in a high-stakes story about saving the planet, there is still room for these small human moments that give the villains a soul. In the words of my favorite Turk, Rude, he's not bad, but he sometimes has to do bad things. One of the most fascinating layers of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is how it takes glitches and developer accidents from the original 1997 game and turns them into official parts of the story. A perfect example of this is the enemy known as Test Zero. In the original Japanese version of the game, players discovered a secret monster that was never meant to be seen by the public. These enemies were actually test mobs, used by the programmers to check if the combat system was working correctly. They were located in a small, weird area in the Corel Desert prison that featured a well with an empty treasure chest inside. Because the chest was always open and useless, fans were wondering if it was part of a deleted quest or just a mistake. In the original game, fighting a Test Zero was a very strange experience. They looked like regular guard dogs but had a massive 30,000 HP pool, which was huge for that early stage of the adventure. Even though they were powerful, they were programmed to be peaceful. They would never actually attack you, and their only action in battle was a text box asking you to please stop hitting them. If you were persistent enough to kill them using poison or gravity spells, they would reward you with a staggering amount of XP and gil. Developers eventually realized that they had left their debug area in the final product, so they removed Test Zero from the English and international versions of the game, leaving the well and empty chest as a mysterious, lonely landmark. Data miners even found a bizarre secret hidden in the game's background files for that well, a tiny red man with a mustache. This character was completely invisible during normal gameplay because he was hidden behind the 3D model of the empty chest. Fans have theorized for decades that this red man was either a secret signature left by one of the game's designers or a trigger used to start the test battles. Because the battle took place in a forest setting, even though the well was in the middle of a desert, it was obvious that the screen was just a playground for the programmers to test different environments and enemy stats. Fast forward to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the developers have shown a wonderful sense of humor by turning this mistake into a full-scale location with its own lore. The well is no longer just an empty room. It has been expanded into a significant arena. They even kept the name Test Zero for the enemies found there, but this time, they gave them a logical reason to exist within the world's story rather than just being a coding accident. It is a brilliant meta-nod to the hardcore fans, proving that in the world of the remake trilogy, even the bugs and hidden signatures of the original creators are being woven into the legend. Square Enix is famously aware of how much fans love their biggest series, and they often hide little Easter eggs that connect their different worlds. While Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts are technically separate universes, they have always been closely linked since many Final Fantasy characters appear in the Kingdom Hearts games. In a very sweet and subtle moment in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the developers included a tiny detail that brings two legendary franchises together in a way that delighted Observance fans. This connection happens through the Turks, Shinra's elite agents. After Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith defeat the rookie agent Elena in battle, she is shown feeling very down and defeated. To cheer her up, she asks her partner, Rude, which is best man by the way, to buy her some ice cream. Later on in the story, if you look closely while Elena is riding in the Shinra helicopter, you can see her happily snacking on a specific treat, sea salt ice cream. This isn't just a random flavor. Sea salt ice cream is an iconic symbol of the Kingdom Hearts series, famously shared by characters like Roxas, Axel, and Xion on the clock tower in Twilight Town. It is highly unlikely that this was just a coincidence. For Square Enix fans, seeing this blue salty sweet treat show up in the hands of a Shinra agent felt like a warm nod to the friendship and emotional themes that both series share. It's a small humanizing moment for Elena that shows even the toughest antagonists of Final Fantasy VII enjoy the same simple comforts as the heroes of Kingdom Hearts. Details like this show how much care goes into making the world of Rebirth feel like a celebration of Square Enix's entire history. One of the most impressive things about Final Fantasy VII Remake is how it uses foreshadowing to build tension, making players realize that many random moments were actually hints about the future. A great example of this happens at the Haunted Hotel in the Gold Saucer, where Ketchi gives Cloud and Barrett 3 different fortunes. At the time, the characters just laughed them off as being fake or silly, but as the story moves forward, each of those vague predictions actually starts to come true in surprising ways. It shows that even the most lighthearted moments in the game are often laying the groundwork for the drama to come. However, the most chilling piece of foreshadowing is a direct callback to the ending of the first game, Final Fantasy VII Remake. During their final confrontation in that game, Sephiroth leaves Cloud with a cryptic and haunting warning: 7 seconds until the end. For years, fans debated what this meant, wondering if it referred to a countdown to the world's destruction or perhaps a specific gameplay mechanic. It felt like a dark prophecy that was just waiting for the right moment to be fulfilled in the sequel. In Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we finally see exactly what Sephiroth was talking about during the tragic scene at the Forgotten Capital. When Sephiroth prepares to strike his final blow against Aerith, he descends from the ceiling with his sword, the Masamune. If you time the sequence, it takes exactly 7 seconds from the moment he begins his descent until the blade makes contact. Those 7 seconds represents the tiny window of time Cloud had to change destiny, a window that Sephiroth knew would be just out of his reach. By connecting these 2 moments, the developers showed that Sephiroth wasn't just making a vague threat, he was mocking Cloud with the exact duration of his greatest failure. It turns a confusing line from the first game into a heartbreaking reality in the second. This level of detail proves that the 7 seconds wasn't about the end of the world, but rather the end of the life of someone Cloud cared for deeply, making Sephiroth appear more calculated and cruel than ever before. The Shinra Mansion is arguably the most important location in the entire story, because it is where the truth about Sephiroth's origin and the planet's history began to unravel. Because this building is so central to the narrative, the developers packed it with small hidden details that explain the history of the characters who lived there. Whether you are exploring it during the Nibelheim flashback at the start of the game, or visiting it with the full party near the end, the manor feels like a museum of the Shinra family's dark secrets and Professor Hojo's twisted experiments. One of the cleverest Easter eggs in the manor is a date recorded in Sephiroth's research files. While studying the origins of the alien life form Genova, he finds a document stating that she was officially declared an ancient on 07/07/1977. For longtime fans, this date isn't just a random number. It is a direct tribute to the original 1997 game's famous All Lucky Sevens mechanic. In the classic game, if a character's health hit exactly 7,777 HP, they would enter a special mode and attack the enemy dozens of times in a row. Using this date is a fun way of the developers to hide a classic gameplay secret inside the actual lore of the world. As you walk through the dusty halls and private rooms of the mansion, you can also find visual clues about the people who once stayed there. For instance, there is a portrait of a young Rufus Shinra, showing that the current president has been connected to these dark experiments since he was a child. Even more disturbing is a family portrait belonging to Professor Hojo. The image has almost entirely faded away, which perfectly symbolizes how Hojo has lost his humanity and abandoned his family in the pursuit of science. He doesn't care about his past or his relatives. He only cares about his specimens. These environmental details do a lot of work to tell the story without needing extra dialogue or cutscenes. By simply looking at the walls of the Shinra mansion, players can piece together the broken relationship and the corporate greed that led to the world's current crisis. It makes the mansion feel like a ghost house, where the past is still lingering in the shadows. Finding these small touches make the exploration feel rewarding and give the characters a much deeper sense of history, proving that even the most famous villains started out with normal families and documented histories. And that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're still awake, how about watching another one of these videos? I suggest watching 2 hours of The Witcher 3 Facts that's on your screen right now. Click it and I'll see you there.